Thank you, Sandro. And now the next presentation is by Professor Milo from the Weizmann Institute on the environmental burdens of animal-based products. But I should also like to point out that Ron is an actual magician of metabolic cycles and biochemistry. So.
Okay, so who has been here since the morning session? Okay, good crowd. So it means that you've heard Lisa Sasson speak about the fact that we see too much, right? So I suggest we all stand for a minute, stretch, right? Okay, you seem to be enjoying. I see some still sitting there. Okay, you can sit when you feel like it. It seems like people want a break or something to continue stretching. You can stretch in the coffee break afterwards, some more. Okay, so I'll be talking about the issue of the environmental burdens of livestock production. And I'll say from the beginning, we're focusing on the US, which has some advantages. For example, there's a lot of data available, and that's why we choose that. There's also a disadvantage for the fact that I was looking as much as I could for a quote from the Bible about livestock production in the US, and I couldn't find anything. So it sort of doesn't fit previous talks, but that's as good as I could do. And I should say from the beginning, this work is a combination, is sort of like a collaboration between Gideon Eschel from Bard College in New York, and as you can see here, Tamar, who is now in Yale, and mostly Alon Shipon, which is also here with us, one of the organizers, and you can see him here together with some of the other, sorry for that, I'm changing slide. So together with Alon, which you can see here and sitting in the front row. And if you're wondering what are the other people doing, so these are other members of the team in the lab. And as was mentioned before, we also working on metabolic networks in general. So we're sort of like trying to combine between the aspect of finding technical solutions. So for example, some of the people here are involved in making E. coli, this pet bacteria of microbiologists, teaching it to take carbon dioxide and make sugar. So this is part of what the lab is doing, and the other part of the lab is doing what I'll be telling you about right now. And so, as you already know from previous talks, livestock have a very major effect on our environmental resources, and still I'm always surprised by looking at this figure. So what you see here is the Mississippi watershed. And just look at all the bright red that you see there. And that just shows you the fact that within the huge area of land that is being in the watershed of Mississippi, the majority of whatever is being grown there is actually not being used for human consumption, but is used in order to feed our livestock. And maybe I should also mention the people involved in this project. Some of them choose not to eat meat, some of them choose to eat meat. As you see, we try to take a quantitative aspect to see what is the impact of changing, let's say, one unit of meat to eating something else, or from one type of meat to a different type of meat. So it's not necessarily that you have to make huge decisions. Also, small changes could make an effect, as we'll be discussing. And so, as we understand, there's a lot of effects of livestock rearing on our environment, so be it greenhouse gas emissions, as well as many other effects. And so we wanted to see the effect of that, and there are all sorts of claims about the fact that moving the growing of feed to growing of food would give you some amount of extra people that would be able to feed. And actually the numbers behind that were usually not very clear, and there's really a big question is what is standing behind that X, the number of people that one could feed, and this is something I want to touch on in this talk. And so you can put it also in a sort of like simple manner, the question of, you know, if somebody comes to you and asks chicken or beef, can you give an intelligent answer in terms of not only what is your personal preference in terms of your taste buds, but also in terms of what does the the planet, how much does it care about the result of answering that? And so there are estimates that that are often cited when you read, say, in the New York Times or in some of the popular media. We wanted to go behind it and find, what are the sources for that. And I have to say, I was pretty shocked to find that usually you find no references, even in the scientific literature. And even when you do find it, you find that there are things that are citing things from the past, and then you go back further on. And it turns out much of it is based on values that go back to the 60s, where the methods of growing livestock were very different in terms of their efficiency and many other things to what is being done today. And therefore, we thought there's really a large interest in trying to revisit those issues. And so how did we approach it? Just in very general outline. On the one hand, we're asking how much feed is being used, is being grown of each type and being fed to livestock. And then we're looking at what are the environmental burdens associated with each type of feed being grown. And then we combine that with how much is being consumed, in this case, in the US. And from that, we're learning about the specific cost per, it could be per calorie, it could be per gram of protein, etc., that you're achieving. And so here is one way to look at the overall result, and that is comparing the overall amount of calories in feed that you have to give in order to get 1 calorie of food that will be consumed in the end. And as you can see, there's quite some differences here. So in red, you can see beef, and that would be, okay, so one thing to involve the audience is to try to, I believe in audience participation, so I already told you what red is. What would you think pink stands for? Okay, so I hear 2 options. So yeah, we were trying to use so like pink is something that's usually being associated with pork, and poultry you can see in yellow here, and then what would be blue? So we were out of colors in a way, and so yeah, this was chicken, and then you could find dairy. And so what you find is that beef is generally very inefficient in the amount of calories that are being required, and at the same time, the other and the values, as you can tell, is about 30 to 40 calories per calorie that you'll be achieving in the end. Whereas for the others, it's about ratio of 10 to 1 in terms of the calories consumed. I should say we're looking here at what's known as loss adjusted, meaning we're looking throughout the whole process until what is actually being consumed in the end. And in that process, there are losses throughout the way, as was discussed in previous talks as well. And so we wanted to give a picture of how that relates to the environmental burdens, into how much of natural resources are being used. So let me try to walk you through our results. What you can see here is, again, the different major animal categories being consumed in the US. As you can tell, this covers about 97% of the consumption in the US. So we don't have fish here, we don't have sheep here, we don't have lamb, which are also interesting to analyze, but are small contributors. And what you see here is the land contribution as the land required to give you a set amount of calories. So how does one read this? So this talks in units of meters squared, meaning how many meters squared are required per year in order to grow a given amount of calories. In this case, we talk about 1,000 calories. And as you can see, the different things are kind of comparable if you look within our uncertainty. But then you can find that beef is sitting at 151, which means that if this is 15, it would go up to somewhere around here. Something sort of that, maybe even a bit more. Although I should say, try to make sure to make a difference between different type of feed lands. What do I mean by that? I don't know if you hear me so well, so I'll go back here. We try to make the distinction that when growing beef, some of it is on pasture land and some of it is on agricultural land. So what you see here in full red is the agricultural land used in order to grow beef, still several times more per calorie than what you use in order to grow poultry or pork. And then there's the pasture land that is not easily transferable into cropland, and that really pushes you even way further, which obviously has all sorts of biodiversity effects and other effects which are also of importance. So we wanted to look not only at land and not only at calorie per calorie, but to look at other environmental impacts. And so let me show you a few other metrics, as we call them. So what you see here is water. When talking about water, we're talking about irrigation water, which, as we heard, is already having quite a burden on the aquifers and is really a natural resource that in future years will be missing those aquifers very much. You can see greenhouse gas emissions. You can see what's known as reactive nitrogen. This is the thing, this is leading to eutrophication. These are the fertilizers being used that then lead to the dead zones that you saw in the previous talk. And as you can tell in all of them, there's a very clear distinction between the different animal-based categories, such that beef is really in a category of its own in comparison to other things in terms of the high impacts. You can also compare it to what the citizens of the US decide to eat. And what you see here is the pattern of consumption. And as you can see, relatively, the choices are not where the environment would have chosen in terms of what to eat. The largest fractions are dairy products and beef, and much less, say, of eggs, which is more environmentally friendly in all those metrics. So I would say the punchline in those respects is that if you try to compare between them, beef is in one category, the others are in a very different category, and so somewhat surprisingly, dairy, if you look at it, it's kind of similar to, say, poultry in terms of its environmental impacts. So not worse, but not better either. All of this is per calorie. One could also make it on an analysis based on protein. But let me now just mention, this is going again, there's this statement that's saying, okay, when we're growing beef, we eat feeding them grass. So let me be clear on that. If you analyze the feeding of beef in the US, about a third is coming from grass, whereas the other 2/3 of calories of feed are coming from cropland. So this is the method. So we're analyzing the US. This is how beef is being grown. This is if you try to combine things together, the consumption and the environmental impacts, and you're asking, out of the land resources being used in the US, which is a lot of land, what fraction goes into feeding of beef versus the other things? As you can see, beef is really dominating on that. And this, excuse me, this is if you look at greenhouse gas emissions. And it's similar in other metrics. So this is the overall effect on eutrophication, overall effect of how much water is being used. So really, beef is really what requires the most environmental burdens. We've been publishing this, and there's been quite a lot of interest in this, which is quite different from what you usually do when the kind of impact that you're getting when you're publishing things on metabolic networks, which was an interesting observation. And different effect for us. It raised some questions for us, which led us to a few of the things that I'm showing you now. What you can see here is trying to give an overall view of what happens in the US livestock rearing process, starting from the beginning. So, for example, if you look at what gets in terms of feed, in order to give you calories for pork, you get an overall efficiency of about 9%. And what you see here visually, in what's known as the Sankey diagram, you can see out of everything that comes in terms of calories, how much is left for human consumption. And you can do that over the overall livestock system. And what you see is this. So this is concentrates. Mostly, for example, as we mentioned here, the maize, the corn being grown throughout the US, as well as soy, as well as some of the wheat. What you see here is processed roughage, so that's also different parts of what's called silage, hay, other things that are also being grown with cropland, but fed only to cows. And then all of this is the feed coming from pasture land. And all of that is turned into these different categories with the efficiencies that you see here. So it goes as low as beef, which is about 3% efficiency. And this shows you the transformation from all of those feed resources that we started with. This is the amount of calories that are in the end being achieved. There's this. Okay, I might use it. Thanks. Before I get feedback. So just I think I need to end soon, but I want to say that the last thing that we've been analyzing recently is asking really the question, what happens if you do a dietary shift? So in this case, we asked, what happens if the Americans decided one day to move completely from beef to chicken? And then ask yourself, given that, how much more Americans can one feed based on that? So that would mean you move from beef to chicken, and then you free up some land resources. You use that not only to grow the chicken that you need to feed instead of the beef, but also the rest is being used in order to give you the mean American diet. And so Alon has been working on that together with the group, and you get about somewhere between 110 to 140 million extra people. It depends on whether you analyze it based on calories or based on protein. So I want to be clear that all of the analysis that we've been doing, I've been showing based on calories, but you can also do it with kind of similar results also for protein, on a protein basis. So for example, if this gives you the amount of feed that gets in order to give us the beef calories, if you would replace it with chicken, you will get this amount, so an extra 500% of calories. And this is the similar picture that you get if you do it for protein. You get another 380% extra calories. And this would give you another 110, and this will give you another 140 extra million people that could be fed. Finally, we're looking also now at the implications of moving from beef into a completely plant-based diet, but one that gives you a similar amount of both calories, protein, and comparing the other nutritional elements. And so here is an example of when you combining different plant-based items that would give you a similar kind of diet. And as you can see, it's mostly composed of legumes and nuts in order to give you a similar amount of protein. And as you can see, the different components of that, so you have some things based on soy and tofu, some things based on legumes and peanuts, etc. This is when you look as a function of mass, and you can also look, this is as a function of the amount of energy that you're getting, the fat and the protein content. So in general, this is a combination of plant items that give you a balanced diet to replace beef. And you can compare what you get in terms of the other items. So as one could imagine, you won't get the B12, which this is the first column here in red, which you're getting from beef, but you're not getting in those plant items, and you'll need to supplement it by other means. But if you look at other things like the vitamins and the content of, we've been looking at several dozens of different nutritional elements, you see that you're getting comparable or usually significantly better dietary elements. And this gives you the environmental savings associated with that beef to plant-based, nutritionally similar diet in terms of so the red bars are the environmental burdens of the beef diet versus the green bars, which are the associated plant items burdens. Okay, so just to conclude, we've been trying to revisit with current, so all the data that I was looking at was based on information from the USDA, from the Department of Agriculture in the United States for the years 2000 to 2010. So we've been working on that for like 5 years now, doing all of those analysis. But this means that we have much more current and up-to-date values on what happens in the field rather than what happened 50 years ago. We find that there's a very clear distinction between what happens with beef and what happens with all the other animal-based products. And I think with that I will conclude. I want to mention again, this is a combination of work together with Gidi Eshel, Alon, and Tamar. Thanks a lot.